Thank you, Mr Speaker. British Airways, as we've already heard, has taken public money from the government's coronavirus job retention scheme, intended to protect workers' jobs, but instead has used this to pay for 12,000 workers on their redundancy notice period. The purpose of the scheme was to keep people in work, not to let them go on the cheap. Will the Minister join me in condemning this behaviour, and will he/she ensure that any further support protects the workforce as intended? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This is probably worth repeating. British Airways, which has benefited from COVID-19 taxpayer support, has issued redundancy notices to its entire 42,000 strong workforce and shamelessly intends to make 12,000 redundant and rehire the remainder on much worse contracts. So British Airways has taken hundreds of millions of pounds of government money intended to protect workers' jobs. In the words of the many British Airways employees in my Leicester East constituency who are fearing for their futures, this is immoral, opportunistic and greedy. Did the government not agree conditions? Does the government plan to stand up to this corporate bully? And will they say now, how will they guarantee protections for workers?
My many constituents who are employed by British Airways are absolutely devastated by the threat of losing their jobs and the proposed downgrading of their terms and conditions of employment. And this is a message that BA needs to hear loud and clear from this House, I think. So I'm glad to hear that she shares the concern of so many members of these proposals, but will she go further and now condemn this behaviour and make it a condition of any financial or business support that they reverse this decision?
Does my right honourable friend agree that if British Airways want to continue to treat their employees with contempt by refusing to take Section 188 off the table and refusing to move the deadline past June 15th, will the government consider speaking to the Aviation Authority to encourage them to remove their legacy slots, their legacy landing slots, as leverage for making sure that they treat their employees with the respect they deserve?
In her response to the honourable member for Leicester East, the Minister said that she wanted to make the point to BA that the job retention scheme was not to be used for redundancies. Can I ask her to confirm specifically what engagement has the government had with British Airways? It's at least 3 weeks since I was first contacted by constituents who are appalled by the way they are being treated after a lifetime of loyal service. What has the government actually done to date to engage with BA on this point?
My constituents in Hertford and Stortford, who are employed by British Airways at Stansted Airport, are desperately worried for their jobs. Will my right honourable friend join me in supporting them, condemning BA, urging BA, a profitable, cash-rich company who has availed themselves of government support in this crisis and in the context of Project Birch, to engage with the government, unions and staff and not to destroy my constituents' jobs?
I've had scores of emails from people representing years and years of loyal service to British Airways who initially welcomed these lefty-looking furlough and job retention schemes and are now finding that the public purse is being used to effectively chuck them on the scrap heap. So, can I ask the Minister to revive another old Labour tradition and, rather than acting a bit like a bystander, to bang some heads together and get unions, airlines and the government round the table? They can have beer and sandwiches at number 10 if they like, and thrash out a sector-specific deal to save aviation in this country.
Much, Mr Speaker. It's quite clear from the kind of callous and cavalier attitude of Willie Walsh that he only understands one piece of language. So can I gently suggest to the Minister this definitely needs to be escalated? When will the Prime Minister be picking up the phone to Willie Walsh and making crystal clear to BA that unless they halt these plans, those much coveted slots at Heathrow will go? We need much stronger language from the government on this, because many of my constituents, frankly, are cheesed off by this.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The slowdown in the aviation sector is having a big impact on jobs in my own constituency. Airbus, Rolls-Royce and GKN employ several thousand people. So does my honourable friend agree that we must get the aviation sector working again quickly, not only to protect jobs, but to preserve our country's world-leading industrial manufacturing capability in civil aerospace and, crucially, in defence?
Minister.
Speaker, and I echo concerns about the shoddy treatment of BA staff. Newcastle Airport's the single largest site employment in my constituency, supporting 4,000 jobs, 19,000 across the North East region. It's pivotal to our regional economy. Airports in Scotland and Northern Ireland have been granted business rates relief. In England and Wales, the government has offered that to retail, hospitality and leisure, but not aviation. She says business rates are not her department, but the Chancellor is not here. So can this government not see that this industry needs support now, but also for the future economic storms that are clearly going to come, that are going to impact areas, particularly like the North East?
Constituents of mine in Coventry South have told me that BA's plan means that they face redundancy, significantly reduced wages and worse working conditions. The company should step back from the brink and instead work with trade unions and the government to develop a strategy that protects jobs and the environment. So will the Minister commit to using the government's powers to prevent this betrayal of staff, such as withdrawing slots at airports and exploring the option to bring back the company under public control?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also represent a number of the British Airways employees affected, and I'm grateful to the Minister for her commitment to keep pressurising the airline to try to minimise the number of job cuts. And indeed, I'd encourage her to do that not simply for British Airways, but all the other airlines affected. But, Mr. Speaker, this sector is the busiest and biggest of its kind in Europe in normal times. It's crucial to our economy. Can I ask her to work with the Chancellor as he comes to his next financial statement during the course of this year to look at a longer-term recovery plan for the sector that goes beyond the immediate government support and actually sets a path that can put this sector back where it should be, which is at the top of the European league table?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the 12th of May, I raised the worries of many of my constituents, some of whom had over 30 years of service with the Transport Secretary. One constituent highlighted to me that on his road alone there are 5 BA members of staff. And let's be clear, these are staff members who've given up birthdays, funerals to serve BA. They've made sacrifices. They fear losing everything when the sham of a consultation ends in 2 weeks. So will the government act urgently now to ensure supports are provided to those constituents and others?
I'm sure she agrees that the staff of British Airways who operate out of Northern Ireland, cabin crew, pilots and other staff feel absolutely betrayed by the conduct of Willie Walsh and the organisation. They carry the strapline national carrier. It should be changed to national disgrace by the way they have operated. But the government can't have it both ways. The government can't close air traffic down, introduce a quarantine that will impact on airports and airlines, and then say this has nothing to do with us. Action has got to be taken to address this holistically, and I urge the Minister and the government to act.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Section 188 of the Trade Union and Labour Relations Act does not just create a general duty to consult with employees, but a specific duty to consult on avoiding redundancies, reducing the numbers of those selected for redundancy and mitigating the consequences. Could my honourable friend commit to including an employment judge or an impartial employment lawyer onto the steering group to assess whether BA and other airlines are meaningfully engaging with their statutory obligations and make this a condition of further government support?
Many of my constituents are facing this consultation now. It cannot be good enough for the Minister to simply say the DWP is ready to offer support if they lose their jobs. These are highly skilled, well-paid jobs in South Wales. It is worth £1 billion to the South Wales economy and more than £6 billion to the Welsh economy as a whole. I say to the Minister, and I don't doubt his sincerity, but her answers just aren't good enough. My constituents and constituents up and down the land are desperate for government intervention to support the aviation sector and all these jobs that many tens of thousands of constituents rely on.
I think much of the anger that's been expressed in this House during this debate has been because British Airways has taken advantage of a government scheme intended to protect jobs and used it as a convenient funding stream for a long-planned corporate restructuring. It's a breach of faith. Does my honourable friend agree that British Airways should pay a price for that breach of faith?
My constituents have had to make huge sacrifices during this terrible outbreak, and they have responded with real solidarity, helping others and following the rules. Now those who work at the British Airways call centre in Newcastle see the contempt in which they are held, and they feel abandoned, betrayed blackmailed. Does the Minister agree that, just as with governments, businesses will be judged by their response to a crisis? And does she think British Airways' response is worthy of our national flag?